The sky was bleeding. From horizon to horizon, the last bastion of the Zarnai Empire groaned beneath the weight of annihilation. Towers that once touched clouds cracked like brittle bone. The enemy, the Krylok swarm, pressed in from every direction, unrelenting, emotionless, consuming. Every cry of war was met with silence, followed by the shriek of something dying. Inside the citadel, Chancellor Virex pressed trembling hands to the shattered command table. Around him, holograms blinked red. Defense grids offline, outer colonies gone dark, final fleet reduced to vapor. They had underestimated the Krylok, thinking their logic-driven warfare could be outmaneuvered. They were wrong. Every protocol, every contingency, every sacrifice, useless. Below the surface, bunkers once filled with scholars and strategists now echoed only with prayers. There were no heroes left, no generals with plans. The young were buried. The old had stopped speaking. Time itself felt like it had started to slow, waiting for the inevitable end. They had always considered themselves the peak of civilization. 30,000 years of uninterrupted evolution, spanning 20 systems. But all of it, every archived miracle, had brought them here, to the final breath of a species about to be wiped from the stars. The council convened not out of hope, but desperation. Chancellor Virex, High Mind Odrin, the militant Prime Shykar, all sat in silence until a forbidden name was spoken. Invoke the last protocol. Shykar rasped, eyes sunken. There was a pause, as if the citadel itself inhaled. Virex whispered, "You mean the summoning?" The room grew colder. The human, a myth passed down through fragments of war logs, encrypted distress signals, half-burned relics from long-lost civilizations. The stories were always the same, a being of impossible cunning, unmatched brutality, and unpredictable fury. No two sightings ever matched, but they all ended the same way. Victory, ruin, silence. Some on the council scoffed. The tales were nonsense, invented to frighten children or explain disasters. Others argued it was a bioweapon or a time-locked AI. But Shykar knew better. Her great-grandmother had seen one only once, during the fall of the Varkon cluster. The Varkon were far more advanced than the Zarnai, and yet they fell in hours after it arrived. "We are out of time," she growled. In the vaults beneath the citadel, ancient mechanisms stirred. Alien glyphs flickered as the last protocol awoke. Arc conduits sparked to life after thousands of years of slumber. They had never tested this device. It wasn't meant to be tested, only used once, if nothing else remained. No one knew where it would reach. No one knew what it would bring. They gathered in the core chamber, a cathedral of metal and light, as the portal began to form. It spun with gravitational defiance, folding space with an audible hum. Reality seemed to bend around it, pulling shadows into its center. Virex took one last breath and activated the final key. The chamber filled with impossible pressure, like a scream held in the lungs of the universe. Then light, blinding, jagged, pure. The portal cracked the air, and through it stepped the one thing the Krylok had never accounted for. The human, and with them came the wrath of a forgotten legend. The human stood motionless, eyes scanning, calm, calculating. He wasn't armored. He didn't wield a weapon. He wore a dark, weathered suit, functional, unremarkable. Yet every fiber of his being radiated danger. His gaze alone seemed to measure the room, not by its grandeur, but by how quickly it could be dismantled. The Zarnai soldiers surrounding the portal chamber froze. Some tried to mask their terror. Others failed. Their sensors couldn't read him. No energy signature matched known species. Biological readings fluctuated. One technician muttered, "He's wrong. Not defective, not broken, just wrong, in the way a predator is wrong inside a petting zoo." Without speaking, the human stepped forward. The silence was oppressive. No one gave him commands. He didn't ask for any. He walked as if he already knew what to do. They followed him, out of fear more than respect. 3 levels above, the Krylok swarm breached the inner walls. Their spiked limbs and glowing cores shimmered in fractal patterns as they poured into the city like a flood of living steel. They were fast, tireless, efficient. They overwhelmed everything in their path. until they met the human. The first wave came like a storm. The human moved like smoke through wind. He snatched a plasma blade from a fallen Zarnai, twisted it backward into its core, and turned it into a crackling whip. With 2 steps, he vaulted off debris and landed among the Krylok, slashing with elegance that looked like instinct. Limbs fell, sparks flew, metal screamed. In seconds, the first 20 were destroyed, and not simply cut down, taken apart in precise, calculated ways. Critical joints targeted, optics gouged, power cores ruptured. The kind of violence that spoke of understanding, not just a war, but of anatomy, strategy, and psychology. More Krylok descended. The swarm adjusted, as it always did, deploying shock units, antimatter suppressors, neural disruptors. The human adapted faster. He scavenged from the battlefield, reconfiguring alien gear mid-fight. An enemy drone was turned into a guided explosive. A fallen comm unit became a jamming beacon. He wasn't fighting with strength alone. He was learning, hacking, repurposing. Watching the feeds, the Zarnai Command Council could barely comprehend what they saw. No training matched this. No simulation prepared them for a being that fought like a soldier, moved like a machine, and thought like a war god. They tried to communicate, broadcast in every known language. The human didn't answer, but his silence wasn't ignorance. It was intent. Every motion he made said, "You speak too much." When the Krylok brought in a kinetic pulse tank, something that had obliterated whole colonies, the human sprinted toward it. The weapon fired, creating a sonic shockwave that turned the nearest building into dust. The human rose from the rubble, bleeding from one arm. He didn't stop. He sprinted straight at the cannon, leapt onto the hull, jammed something into its power vent, then jumped clear just as it exploded in a ball of silver fire. The Zarnai soldiers, watching from a distance, finally understood. This wasn't a savior. This wasn't a soldier. It was a weapon unleashed. In the aftermath, a single question spread across the Zarnai ranks like wildfire. What is he? And deeper still, whispered in the minds of those who had summoned him. What are we brought here? Because somewhere in the cold quiet beyond the stars, something had answered their call, and now it walked among them. He didn't retreat because he was losing. He retreated because he was thinking. The human moved through the shattered corridors of the Zarnai capital like a shadow with intent. He was mapping terrain, noting structural weaknesses, collecting scrap and data from fallen enemies. Every wall, every corner, became part of a larger strategy that no one else could see. The Krylok advanced with predictable arrogance, chasing him into the ruins. Their numbers swelled, flowing through broken city arteries with machine precision. But the human had laid a web of traps, not conventional mines or explosives. He used pressure shifts from collapsed air ducts to trigger concussive discharges, jury-rigged from enemy power cells. Explosions weren't loud. They were surgical. Every detonation collapsed a path, cut off escape routes, funneled the enemy tighter and tighter. By the time the Krylok realized they were being led, they were too deep inside. The air shifted. Even the seasoned swarm units hesitated. For the first time in their calculated existence, something felt wrong. Their algorithms flagged the human's presence as a level Z anomaly, an unquantifiable variable. Krylok commanders pulsed new formations, trying to box them in. But the formations broke. Not from weapons, but from fear. Units stopped responding. Surveillance feeds went dark. Half a battalion vanished inside a collapsed refinery with no trace. The swarm began broadcasting emergency protocols to its soldiers. Retreat was no longer dishonor. It was survival. Then he appeared inside their field network. The human had tapped into the swarm's command frequency. A camera feed activated. He stood in the heart of their flagship hangar, surrounded by flame, holding a severed Krylok sensor module in one hand. His face was calm. Cold, he spoke 2 words. "Now you run." Then he moved. Security logs from the Krylok flagship later showed the impossible. He had disabled their gravity regulators using parts of a broken Zarnai drone. He had infiltrated the bridge using an airlock designed only for atmospheric refueling. He had passed through 3 automated kill zones without being hit once. In under 5 minutes, he dismantled the swarm's strategic core. Command lines blinked out. Navigation systems failed. Ships lost orbital balance. The flagship itself tilted sideways, crashing into its escort vessels in a flaming spiral. The sky above the Zarnai citadel lit with a fire of dying machines. The council watched in disbelief as their worst fear turned to an impossible truth. The Krylok were fleeing, not retreating. Fleeing. One by one, swarm units powered down mid-combat. Without command, they reverted to standby, easy targets for Zarnai's soldiers who had, moments ago, accepted death. The human didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He stood atop the burning remains of the flagship, breathing hard, eyes distant. Blood from wounds he hadn't treated still dripped down his side. A comm link flickered to life. Vyrex's voice came through, shaky. "Who? What are you?" The human looked at the shattered sky, then down at the device. His voice was quiet, almost emotionless. "Survivor." The message was received across every Zarnai relay. Not a title, not a threat, a truth, and that truth would echo long after the silence returned. After the fires dimmed and the Krylok disappeared into the void like phantoms banished, the silence that followed was not peace. It was awe. The Zarnai survivors emerged slowly from bunkers and broken halls, walking among the wreckage of both the enemy and their own collapsed arrogance. The swarm was gone, but what remained behind was something more powerful than fear. Legend. The human had vanished from the battlefield without fanfare. No broadcast, no farewell, no reward demanded. One moment he stood among the twisted metal of the Krylok command node, and the next, only footprints remained, leading toward the blackened edge of the city. They searched for him. Scans deployed across continents. Drones swept miles of scorched terrain. No trace, not even residual heat signatures. Only destruction remained. Destruction with surgical precision, and the unmistakable imprint of a mind that thought 10 moves ahead. In the central archives, Chancellor Vyrex watched the replay of the battle over and over. Not to analyze. There was nothing left to learn, only to remind himself that it happened, that the stories were true, that somewhere, across the infinite darkness of space, humanity still existed. Unchained, undomesticated, and untouched by the diplomacy or ethics the Zarnai had spent centuries refining. And then the messages began. Faint, encrypted, older than their language systems could easily decode. Broadcasts on dead frequencies, pulsing from ancient satellites no one had touched in millennia. They weren't from a human, but about them. Warnings, mostly, from species long thought extinct. Scribbled fragments of machine dialects, half-decayed logs, time-locked war records. Never summon a human, unless you are willing to pay the price. Victory will be yours, but peace will not follow. They are not heroes. They are what comes after hope fails. Vyrex silenced the logs. He understood now. Across the city, murals began to appear, first in secret corners, then on official memorials. The human became a symbol, not of salvation, but of desperation's final card. The last weapon. The final consequence of underestimating what rage looks like when it evolves inside a species forged in extinction after extinction. The children asked, "Will the human return?" The elders answered, "Only if we are foolish again." High Mind Odrin proposed that the last protocol be dismantled, destroyed, but Shaikar disagreed. "Let it remain," she said, "not as a tool, as a reminder, because legends are not warnings when forgotten. They're traps, out in the dark, in systems untouched by the Krylok or the Zarnai." The story spread, whispered among mining ships, recorded in trade bars passed through black markets, from one fringe colony to another, a message that something ancient still breathed among the stars, something that did not care for treaties or balance or control, a being that fights not for conquest or glory, but because someone, somewhere, went too far. And so the galaxy remembered. They remembered the day the Krylok swarm turned and fled. They remembered the sound of silence after the scream. They remembered that, when cornered and desperate, one empire summoned the thing their enemies feared most, a human,